I apologize for banging so loud, but I want to get everybody's attention. I was actually in the Speaker's chair in High Shea County a week ago, and the Speaker of the House, I banged the gavel to the delegation, and she said, "No, you don't do it like that," and she banged it 3 times. Just there's a spot worn where she banged the gavel, so I thought I'd give it a try once. Anyway, I'll call this meeting to order, and I would ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Arnold? Councillor Bouchy? Councillor Bradley? Councillor Broad? Councillor Brusewich? Councillor Case? Councillor Cook? Councillor Gilliland? Councillor Gillis? Councillor Hand? Councillor McDougall? Councillor Marriott? Deputy Warden McCharles? Councillor McGugan? Councillor Napper? Councillor Veen? Warden Weber? The roll has been called. You have a quorum.
Thank you. So the purpose of this meeting is to be presented with the draft 2017 budget and overview of the key highlights. So I will ask Mr. Innes to present that for discussion, just for receiving at this meeting.
For information purposes this morning. Thank you, Mr. Warden, and good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for coming out today. As has been the tradition at the county here for I guess most of my tenure here, and since the turn of the century, basically, we unveiled the budget to you on the Wednesday before deliberations are going to happen, or the mid-month Wednesday before the deliberations are going to happen, and we do that as part of this joint committee meeting. So again, I have a number of slides that I will present to you here. You do have the budget binders in front of you. I'll allude to what you have, why it is different from what you've received in the past, the information that you have into it, and what further information you will get as part of my presentation. So what's happened since last year? Well, we have a new assessment role that is going to create all sorts of opportunities and challenges for us. We know that certain classes of property seem to have increased in value considerably more than others. But we do continue to show a small but a solid growth in the assessment base in excess of any rate of inflationary changes that we have. SAMS, which is the system used by OW to make their payments, seems to now be largely working the way that it should. We're not seeing any of the large anomalies that plagued us when the system first came up. Is it perfect at this point in time? No, but at least it is generating information that is useful for us. Something that is near and dear to the hearts of Councillor Case and myself is landfills. This is a journey that I believe, Mr. Case, you started on about 10 years ago. We got involved with the province, and between the efforts of Mr. Case, his staff, and the county staff here, we've actually been able to influence the decision on what the province is going to do, and we are looking to see some further interesting developments on that as we go through this particular year. Doesn't have a direct impact on us right now, but it does impact on how these types of properties will be taxed in the future going forward. The province continues to make changes to its funding formulas. They tell us that a lot of this is designed to reflect changes in the way programs are delivered, to provide efficiencies, and to generally make sure that we do not have overlap between various jurisdictions. And the last point I would make is that finally, SWIFT has received the federal and provincial funding that we have been hoping that would come to it for the last at least 3 years. The negatives that are impacting on us going forward, the Ontario Municipal Partner Fund, OMPF, If you are a small rural municipality that used to get a large percentage of your funding related to farmland, you're still losing money from that. And again, there are several jurisdictions and area municipalities in this room are facing that. The overall fund is not changing, but the ratio of how the grants are calculated is, and until that all settles and comes to an end, we're going to continue to see these decreases in the near future. The provincial government still has a deficit, surprise, surprise, and if you were listening to the news today, the question is going to be, is it $1.5 billion higher or less than the number that they've come up with? And although there have been promises of significant funding coming from the senior levels of governments, especially the federal government, we still have not seen funding that the county here has been able to take advantage of. And the last point to make here is, even though SWIFT has gotten funding and we're finally beginning to see things come together, we're still years away from being able to have and say that there's universal high-speed internet available to everybody in rural Ontario. As a result, municipalities are still trying to solve the same budget and funding problems that we've been talking about for a long time. Property assessment, as I've indicated, this is the first year of a new assessment role. There have been several changes to tax policy and tax tools. I'll talk about that in a minute. Staff continue to work with the province to try and make sure that our concerns, issues, and priorities are reflected in the policy decisions that come out of MPAC and the province. The actual weighted change in assessment for the county for the current year is 3.19%. That compares with 3.33 last year. So again, the growth is down. Overall growth is down slightly, but still is closer than it would have been otherwise. We had real growth this year of 0.86%, which translates into an additional $606,000 that can be collected in taxes from the tax roll without impacting the taxation of other properties. And that, again, compares favorably with the $617,000 that we collected last year. And both of those numbers are considerably more than the $240,000 that we saw in 2015. I talked about the fact that there's been some changes to tax policy options and tools. What is new is the first one, and this will be especially relevant to Petrolia and the city of Sarnia, is the fact that the province is giving all municipalities the opportunity to customize your vacancy rebate programs. You have the option of going from everything from a phase-out and an elimination of the program to any other modification that you think is appropriate. The only restriction is the fact that it has to be done at the upper level here. The other point that they've given us is that we are now at the point where we can actually talk about the ending of capping. The province introduced rules last year that mean that most municipalities, if not all municipalities in the province, should be in a position to be out of capping within 5 years. So the significance of that is it's going to reduce the technical complexity of setting the tax rates each year. And plus, for the first time in close to a quarter of a century, you're actually going to have real equity between the tax levels that properties in the commercial, industrial, and multi-residential classes are paying. The last one that they've done is an interesting change from what's been in the past. In the past, your ratios were fixed on the roll as it was returned in December of each year. Any in-year changes could not be factored into the calculation of what is referred to as the revenue-neutral tax rates. Beginning with 2017, we can now take in-year changes and we can look at whether or not it makes sense to adjust those rates, because that has all sorts of implications for capping and other programs that go forward. Again, it's an indication of the fact that the province is beginning to recognize that municipalities have the skill, the expertise, and the experience to be able to make these complex changes and policy decisions. What has been continued? Tax ratio flexibility. Anytime we have a reassessment year, we do have the right to go back and readjust the ratios that affect the various classes of property to ensure that if we've had any shifts in overall tax funding liability between classes, that we can restore that. So if we have if the industrial class went down considerably and the commercial class went up by a similar amount, we can rejig those ratios to put the overall balance of taxes back into the way they were before. The last point is something that was imposed upon us. It was not asked by municipalities, but it was asked for by representatives of the multi-residential property owners. And what the province has instigated is that if your ratio for multi-residential class is in excess of 2, the county's is 2.4, that you are restricted from passing through any levy increase to that class. We are still studying this. I am in conversation with the province. I don't believe that the residential class is being overtaxed, but whether I've made my case or not is yet to be seen. Regardless, the point here that I wanted to make is that tax policy has tended in the last several years to be, gentlemen, ladies, please, status quo, continue on with what we're doing. It's been working. Let's just do it. We are going to have some really significant discussions with your staff this year, and we may very well be coming back with some recommendations for the significant changes for the first time in years. Debt level, it's always something that is a concern to you around the table. We indicate that we continue to pay off a significant amount of debt each year. We have taken a look at things. We factored in not only what the existing debt is, but what the debt that's been previously approved but hasn't been taken out yet, plus what the possible new debt could be. We factored that into the calculation, and we're looking at a 29% utilization factor. Again, we've always made it a policy here to try and keep our ratio between 30 and 25%, so we are within the range that you have specified for us. We are proposing at this point in time to undertake new debt of $2.5 million. That's up slightly from the amount that we suggested in 2016. We are again proposing 8 projects to be funded by debt. We have one in the museum. This is actually for the Lambton Heritage Museum, which has been in need of some major work on its main building. We actually have 3 for long-term care. Again, even though we did a major rebuild of the homes, just 15 years ago, we still have to keep on spending money or we're going to end up with bigger bills later on. And again, we have some projects in public works, notably bridges. Our criteria for suggesting debt is very simple. Is it an asset that's going to last at least as long or longer than the time it's going to take us to repay the debt? And then, is it a tangible asset that we can take a look at? So in other words, if it's something that's physical you can point to and say, yes, that's something that's worthwhile funding, we will propose that and we will put it into it. We do not take out debt for any other types of expenditures. In addition to the long-term debt here, we also have a couple of years back instituted a revolving IT line of credit. We use this for refreshing our supplies of computing equipment. We put this in place because we were able to find a reseller who will buy our used equipment from us, and so that we don't have to worry about disposing of it. And the percentage and the cost of financing on this revolving line is considerably lower than the leasing rates we used to pay. Final 2 points here. The county is considered to be a low borrower. In other words, I have never had a provincial agency or Standard & Poor's, our credit agency, tell us that they think that our debt is high or uncontrolled. And that is reflected in the fact that we have an AA- stable credit rating. Key cost components in the budget. Start off with expenditures. I'm going to draw your attention to the first line here, which shows the 0. And the reason I'm putting in that here is that last year we had a significant drop in the number of committed grant payments that Council had been making the previous year that came off the books. We did not have any changes. So in other words, we did not approve any additional long-term grants last year, and there were none that expired in the current year. So there was no change in the overall funding matrix for the county as opposed to that, or from that source for the last year. We do continue to have an uploading of OW costs from the province. So again, we do not just simply show you the costs, we show you when we have a reduction in costs because somebody else is picking them up for us. The last one that I would bring your attention to is the fact that we are still showing, putting additional money into our funding of amortization costs going forward. We try and be reasonable. We continue with the plans that we present to you. We do not propose expenditures unless we have brought them to you and sought your approval for them before. So everything that you see in the list here is the result of either a decision that's been previously made by this council or something to do with a funding relationship coming from the province. The overall impact of these quantifiable expenses, $3.1 million. So in other words, when we started the budget, we were already looking at a net increase in expenditures that we had to figure out how to finance of over $3 million. On the revenue side, we have had a couple of small changes in that. The major change there has been is related again to the funding of our amortization. And again, we put money into the amortization reserve, we take money out. We had the money that we put in 2017, we'll take out in 2018. We put money in last year, that's the money that's coming out to fund expenditures this year. So again, we have roughly a $600,000 increase in the amount of new funding that came on board, which means that the net identifiable impact on the budget when we started our discussions at the staff level was $2.5 million. Interestingly enough, the $2.5 million, and this includes some of the numbers we have down here, but we've always get the question, what are we putting into reserves? We have $5 million in the budget to put into reserves this year. You can see the details of those on the screen before you. They're in your book as well. This is consistent with the direction that Council has given us in the past, that you have told us to put these monies into the base budget, and then you will determine what you're going to do with that as you go forward on the floor during your discussions. Other the quantifiable impacts or directly quantifiable impacts on the budget, we, at the front of your binder, underneath the first page, in addition to a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, you have a budget's impact report, and you also have a copy of the social trends report. That report is actually going to committee PM this afternoon, but we have put a copy into your binder as well to make sure that you have that available so you understand what's driving the numbers in social services. I spent a lot of time doing analysis looking at the numbers to try and understand why the changes are what they are. And one of the things that I noted this year was the fact that we've actually had a decrease in the overall percentage of funding that's coming from non-tax sources. So when you take a look at that, and if you factor in what that percentage of non-tax funding was last year as a percentage of the whole and compare it to the current year, we've actually had a shift of funding responsibility onto the tax base of $430,000. That's about a 0.55 impact on the budget. So again, I can't tell you exactly or quantify where that all is, but when you add up everything, that is the net effect that we've had, that the budget is experiencing this year. So again, despite staff's best efforts, we're already starting on a bit of a left foot because we're actually having less overall sources of funding available to us that we can draw on. The county is going to end up 2016 with a small surplus of $320,000. Again, at the third quarter, we indicated to you that we were either going to be in a small deficit or a small surplus. I am happy to tell you today that it'll be a small surplus. We will be providing you with the details of how that surplus came about when you get as part of the agenda for the budget meeting on March 2nd. The final point here is that we are also continuing on the program funding, that's the amortization reserve I talked about earlier, for the replacement of existing TCAs. We do not use that to purchase new tangible capital assets. We only use that to replace existing tangible assets that we have consumed and need to be rejuvenated or replaced. And lastly, We always like to make sure that everybody is aware of this. We have provided you projections on what we think the funding is going to be from the various provincial agencies, but their year end is March 31st, and they really don't want to start talking about contracts until the end of the first quarter of their year. So it's usually sometime in August, and actually it's been as late as the year after the year we were supposed to get the funding that we hear exactly what we're going to receive. So just please be aware of the fact that we've given you our best estimates, but we may be presenting reports to you later in the year as to indicating that the province has decided in its infinite wisdom that we deserve less. I'd like to say more, but it seems to be these days it's always less. The draft budget binder, again, Councillor Broad came in and commended staff on the fact that the binder was much narrower this year than in previous years. I'd like to say that that was because the budget is smaller than in previous years, but I can't. It just means that what you're receiving is a more condensed version of some of the documentation you've received in the past. The Budget Process Review Committee, chaired by Deputy Warden McCharles, came through and made some specific recommendations and gave directions to staff on how to change the budget this year, or the book. So how is the book different from previous years? You'll find that the layout and the organization of the overviews has changed. We've tried to put more relevant information up in the front so that you can get it from the first page instead of having to go further into the schedule, because some of our overviews are multi-pages. You will not see a line-by-line schedule in the binder for each budget. So in other words, if you were to take a look at, for example, corporate services and clerk's department this year, you would find there's an overview. It explains to you the differences. It talks about the impacts, but you're not going to have a line-by-line report there. If you want it, we can provide it to you, but we were specifically asked not to include those in the base binder. Same as council grant applications. We have the information, but we're just providing you the results of that information. If you want the information, let me know. Lastly, we've provided you a new section, I believe it's tab 14, non-TCA projects, and this is specifically to identify what is a contribution to a reserve and what is otherwise a non-TCA project, which is basically something that would be a tangible capital asset other than the fact that either we do not own it or it does not fall into that class for accounting purposes. The rest of the book is relatively unchanged, and again, if you go through this list here, that explains what's happening there. Department overviews, I've provided a slide in here just to, again, give a bit of an explanation and definitions to what each section talks about. That is provided to you for your information purposes. Cash requirements overview. So how has the budget changed for this year? Our operating expenditures are up $6.4 million. The reason they're up $6.4 million is because we have an almost $4 million flow-through of funding in our social housing program. It's 100% dollars. It comes in as a revenue. It flows out as an expense. That's why the taxation required is so much lower than the actual expenditure line. Again, when you drop it to the bottom line, you'll see that we're up about $7.4 million, which is 3.75%. If you exclude that flow-through funding and expenditure I talked about, we're actually looking at 3.9, just slightly below the $4 million mark, and instead of 3.75, it would be 2.01%. The actual taxation requirements, before we start applying various optional fundings that are available, we're looking at a 2.3 and a 3.25% increase in the budget as we're presenting it to you today. So again, these are the overall numbers. I mentioned the fact that we have new assessment on the roll. This is new to the roll, so this means that this is monies that are available that do not impact on the tax rate. When you factor that in, the net increase that we are proposing to start your debates today is 2.39%. 2.39% compares to 3.34% last year. So when I gave you this presentation last year, you were looking at a 3.4% increase. You eventually settled on a 1.94. So again, I'm just trying to put this information into context for you. The current rate of inflation at the end of 2016, 1.8%. Total inflation over the last 10 years is close to 17.5%. An interesting statistic, for every dollar that we were raising in 2007, we're actually raising $1.02 after we discount inflation in 2016. So again, we are basically consistent with our level of taxation when you factor in and discount inflation. Tax rates will increase by roughly 0.58% this year, so a half a percentage point change. And in total, since 2006, the tax rate is 8.06% lower than it was in that year. What does that tell you? That tells you that even though the tax base has increased by an amount in excess of, let me rephrase that. We have left dollars on the table. We have not increased the tax rate consistent with the rate that the assessment base has increased. It has only increased enough to fund that is necessary to fund the operations of the county. We've used everything we can to maximize federal gas tax and OSIF funding. And just a reminder, we do not include council grants into this calculation, new ones, and we do not include anything that was referred to budget. The council grants, you only have one request in 2017. You received a delegation from this at your meeting at the 1st of February, and that is for $164,250. That is coming for the hub that is in Sarnia. And that you will receive information with that in the budget so that you can debate that as you go forward. Again, indicating the fact that right now, in the absence of other sources of financing, you would need to add that to the tax base to raise the dollars, or to eliminate something else and decide to replace it with that in order to keep things status quo. We only have one item that was referred to budget. That's the Canada's Waterscape exhibit. This is actually an expenditure in 2019. But again, we were asked to bring that forward so that there could be a further discussion of that. There is a recommendation in the overview of your binders. And again, we will talk about that on the morning of March the 2nd as well. The budget meeting itself, the first change, of course, is that, the biggest change is that it's no longer the third Wednesday of March. It is now going to normally be the first Wednesday. When that change was proposed and accepted by Council in the fall, we did not know that our friends at OGRA were going to decide to shift the date of their meeting as well. And as a result, we have moved that from the Wednesday to Thursday, the March 2nd. The meeting will start at 9 a.m. in these chambers. Attached to the agenda, you will find 4 reports. There will be the annual attrition management update report from Mr. Van Horn. There will be the annual impact regarding funded amortization. That's a statutory report that you are required to receive before you decide on the budget. There will be an update on the asset management plan. So how would the funding that we've talked about in this budget impact on that document going forward? And then I will give you the actual report on surplus and deficit. You need to determine whether or not you are going to fund that grant request and at what level. And then the item referred to budget will have to be dealt with as well. We do not require individual motions. If you were satisfied with the budget and made no changes to it, we only would need the one motion. So it's by exception, so it's only when you want to make a change or you want to approve something at the end that you need to make that. Otherwise, the only other thing that you need to be aware of is that there will be 2 bylaws available. One will be to approve the budget in whatever form you so desire if you reach the point of making a decision on that day. The other will be to approve some proactive appeals that need to be have a resolution of council passed as well. Other key dates. In the event that you cannot finish your deliberations on the 2nd, there is a second date. The following Thursday, March the 9th, is set up for that purpose. And again, then we start to run into the other key change from the budget is that you now have a new date for a council meeting this year. So the first Wednesday in April now becomes a council meeting date. So there is a meeting that is scheduled for the 5th as well. The rest of that, the schedule that I'm presenting to you here should look consistent with what you've seen in previous years. In summary, we have $606,000 available in real growth. So in other words, we can take an additional $600,000 from the tax base without impacting the tax rates. Contributions to reserves are consistent with the direction you've given us. We continue to build the reserves and make sure that they are there so that we can fund the activities of the organization going forward. We have maintained existing service levels. We're not talking about any reductions to the level of service we have. The net cost of increase of funding from the tax base, it will be an increase of 2.39%. I talked about that shift off of non-tax sources onto the tax base. If you discount that, then our increase would be 1.78%, which is very close to the rate of inflation, which was always our target when we are looking at drafting the budget for you. Tax rates will go up by 0.58%. And even though they're going up by 0.58%, they're still 8% lower than they were 10 years ago. So that is the presentation this morning, Mr. Warden. In addition, I'm open for any questions or explanations that councillors may have. And the only other point I would make is that if any councillors have specific questions about something between now and March the 2nd, please do not hesitate to contact myself or Mr. Van Horn or any of the managers in the room. We would be more than pleased to meet with you and explain them.
Thank you, Mr. Innes. And I just want to thank yourself, your department, and all the department heads for putting together a document that I'm sure will answer a lot of questions, and I'm sure that the background information that you have when questions come from council will be able to be sought quickly. So I appreciate the many hours that are going into assembling this, putting it together for the preparation, and thank you. Any questions of clarification? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Warden Weber. Through you to Mr. Innes. Mr. Innes, thank you for the budget, the way it's presented. Looks pretty good so far, but I haven't gone too far into it. I'm just wondering, would you be able to have a report for us for our next meeting in March in regards to the ramifications of a decrease in the farm tax rate? I know our neighbor to the south, I think they dropped it down to 22%. And I've had a number of phone calls over the last couple of months asking if Lambton would consider doing something like that. But we can't do anything unless we see what the ramifications would be. And I'm just wondering if there would be enough time before our first budget meeting to have an idea what that might look like.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Actually, that is part of the tax policy analysis that we normally do in April. The short answer is that if you reduce the ratio on the farm class, then you are going to shift taxation onto the other classes. What the actual percentages of that are going to be, it depends on, the net impact depends on what other changes you make. If we were to change a ratio on the large industrial or whatever, it would have another impact behind it. So the impact of changing the ratio is the fact that you are going to shift tax liability onto the other classes. We do that analysis usually as part of our tax policy review. I have been anticipating that there would be at least one such request coming from the farm community, and we are in the process of doing the analysis. So I will not have that analysis complete in time for the discussions on March the 2nd, but before you finalize your tax rates for the year, you will have information with regards to that.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Warden Weber. Oh, thanks, John. I appreciate that. I know that it's just a tax shift. and that's why it's not going to really impact our budget process here. So if it's coming back for that April meeting, that's just perfect for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor McGugan.
Warden Weaver, members of County Council, I likely should know the answer to this. Have we started to put money towards the money that we committed to the college? And if we have, how much? And if we haven't, when do we start?
Yes, Councillor McGugan, we committed, or for the college, the $5 million over the number of years. It is already built into the schedule that we have. It's part of the budget that you have right now. So it's there and it's built into it going forward. So that's in the numbers that you have that I presented to you today.
Follow up?
Thank you. Have we paid some already, or is this the first year?
I believe this is the first year.
Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Warden Weber. Through to you, to John. Could you clarify, please, the monies to SWIFT? Will this be the second year that we will have paid that money?
We have put together. We have set aside for the last 2 years the funding that was necessary for SWIFT based on the initial assessment that they had given us on that. Those are currently in reserves and they are available and they are not impacting on the budget right now. So SWIFT is currently billing for the first 2 years. There will be another billing that will come out at the end of this year, I would expect, for the third year. We will, at that point in time, need to have a discussion as to how we are going to fund that, in the fact that we have thus far taken the funding out of the Opportunities and Contingencies Reserve. We've actually set the money aside into a separate pool in order to indicate the fact that it was assessed for this. The short answer is that there's no impact on the current budget as you've got it. The money's going forward in 2017. We haven't actually paid the monies yet. We've been invoiced for it, but we haven't paid that because one of the things that Council told staff that we were to get before we issued the funds was the business plan, and quite frankly, I'm still waiting for the business plan to come forward.
So the money is sitting in an account, and we will, I guess, to the warden, we will be debating this before the money does get dispensed.
Yeah, I believe so.
You have not up to this point in time built it into the base budget to come from the tax base. So my comment about debating it is that going forward, how is it to be funded? Do you want it to continue to fund it as coming as a drawdown from the Opportunities and Contingencies Reserve, or do you want to build it into the base budget? That's what I was basically referring to. So there's two aspects that are here. One is the fact that once the business plan has been brought forward, then we will be bringing it forward to confirm that Council wishes us to make the payments, because again, I have not received clear direction to make those payments up to this point in time. Then the second question is going to be, how is it going to be funded going forward? So there are a number of reports that come forward. You've had a number of recommendations, but no funds have been paid out yet. We continue to participate and work diligently with the staff of the SWIFT organization about the process. As you had at the last meeting, we are open to talking with other groups about anything we can do to promote the provision of high-speed internet across the county. But we will follow. We are simply following the directions of Council, which is when the business plan is in place, bring it forward, and we'll then be seeking the permission to release the funds at that time.
Okay.
Just the final comment, Warden. As long as we get a chance to debate it, with the announcement of the federal money that might be coming, just in case there is a lot better way of resolving internet issues in the county.
Okay. I think that's the plan, to have it debated. Do something else, Ted? Okay.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Warden. It's my recollection that the motion that was passed by County Council with respect to participating in SLEP was conditional on the development and bringing back to here of the business plan. So we don't have the authority to proceed. It was a conditional approval anyways. The second piece related to that is, and I don't have it in front of me here, but we received an email last night, late in the evening, from Jeff Hogan, who has just wrapped up a presentation to Middlesex County Council with respect to the SWIFT program, because I think they had passed a similar motion that their approval was conditional on the business plan. And my recollection from the email, I read a lot trying to get caught back up from having been conned in the last week. But my recollection was that the business plan is done or about to be done by SWIFT. And so what they're doing is they've offered to go out to meet with all the local councils, such as Lambton, which had passed conditional approvals, to come and talk about the business plan, where the project is, and what the next steps are. So I'm seeing, I think, smiles. If I can speak back to Mr. Hogan and ask that he come to County Council, it would likely be the April meeting now, I guess, and have him come to Council and do the presentation, and you'll have the opportunity for the discussion and debate then.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Case.
I'm almost afraid to ask this question, Mr. Warden, but maybe through you to maybe Mr. Van Horn. When is this plan going to be done? We've been waiting for this business plan for quite some time now. It's been going on a long time. Steve was part of it when he was warden. I was chair of Western Wardens Caucus, and then we had Bev involved too. I'm just wondering, I know there were certain hurdles that had to be obviously gone around before you could get there, but when is this coming? And again, that's so key to all of us here. What that plan says is going to have a lot to do with whether we continue to support something like SWIFT or look at something more of a local initiative. So I guess I'm just looking for a little bit of guidance on maybe when this plan is going to come. So I'll give it to you, Mr. Warden, to give the question over to whoever you see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. What I can do after Council is I will take the email that I received from Mr. Hogan with respect to what he wants to talk about with the councils. It has to do with the business plan, was my recollection, and it may be done or it's just about to be done. So I'll send that email out to everybody so they have an answer to that question.
Okay. Mr. Gilliland, Councillor Gilliland.
Warden Weber, I'm looking at tab 12, Cultural Services, and I'm trying to figure out on the Judith and Norman Art Gallery, is there an outstanding capital debt owed to the county? I can't figure these pages out. Is there a repayment on here?
There is debt associated with the art gallery. There was a small amount of debt that came from the funding of the actual construction of the building itself, and there was a second small debt that was associated with the fundraising campaign as well. So the cost of finishing it was split between the two. The debt for the building was being paid through the levy. That was always the part and parcel of the approval that was put forward to council. The debt that was associated from the fundraising is being paid off gradually through additional fundraising that has been made by the organization going forward. So again, there is those small numbers. I can provide that information to you in advance of March 2nd. Sorry, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me at this point in time.
Follow up?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is there is an outstanding amount that's owed to the county. Or is it just going to find its way out?
If I'm hesitating, I'm just trying to parse owed to the county. The county borrowed money to construct its facility, being the county-owned facility, the Judith and Norman Alex Art Gallery. There is debt associated with that It is currently being paid. It's either being paid from the levy or it's being paid from donations. And so the amount that is being paid from the levy is the amount that council approved to have paid from the levy. The amount that was being paid from donations is the amount that council accepted for that when they said that that funding was approved. So everything is going the way that it should be. There is debt that is outstanding. It is not excessive, but there is some debt there, and I will provide that information.
Thank you. Councillor Boucher.
Mr. Warden, to John, I just want to make sure that my figures about Sarnia is correct. We passed a budget 2.32% in Sarnia. If we pass this one as it is, and the county, which is 2.39%, stays like that, am I right in saying that after education as 0.3%, we'll end up with 1.72% increase in Sarnia? Am I correct in that?
Page from the book of my engineering firm friends and say that until I run the numbers, I don't really want to comment on that one. But let's just simply say there would be a minimum impact on your overall starting point that you have from the county's numbers because they are consistent with yours. So if you took a look at what you thought you were going to end up with based on the education and your current rates, the county rate as currently proposed is not going to materially shift that. It would put it, it might change it, if, a couple of hundredths of a point, but that's about it.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to just make note this sheet that has the dates on it. It has Wednesday the 2nd, and that should be Thursday the 3rd, I believe, of March for the budget. That was a motion from council at the last meeting. And just as we make note of that, and I will declare this meeting adjourned to meet again on Thursday, March the 2nd.